to a day in history. This is our first pirate news that we want to bring to you. My name is Joseph, and I hail from you from Lowell, Massachusetts. And we also have Jamie with us.
Hi.
Jamie?
Sorry. I'm James O'Keefe. I'm captain of the Massachusetts Pirate Party and one of its 3 founders.
Yep, excellent. And I am also the quartermaster, which is essentially your treasurer. So today we had a really special topic for you. It's one that's been getting a lot of buzz and a lot of talk back and forth, and that is, of course, the net neutrality. James, can you tell us a little bit more about what net neutrality is and why it's so important to everybody?
Sure. When the internet was first created as ARPANET by the Department of Defense and by DARPA, it was created such that all data that went over it wouldn't be discriminated against. And as it evolved over time, that's just the way things were done. If someone wanted to, back in the day, transfer a file or send an email, long before we had the web, then they could do that and know that the bits they were sending out would get there and not be put aside or rate limited, such that their bits would get there slower than someone else's bits. And that's been the way the internet has been since its inception. So what we've been seeing in the last decade or so is that internet service providers, the people we connect to in order to gain access to the internet, they're trying to throttle it in 2 ways. One, they're throttling the bits. So we saw back a year or so ago where Netflix actually got its traffic throttled such that it wouldn't go through certain internet service providers like Comcast very quickly. And that was used as leverage on Netflix to say, well, which gets us to the other part, which is if Netflix wants to get its bits to you, its video streams to you quickly, then they have to pay Comcast or other internet service providers an extra charge in order to get those bits to your phone, or it's to your mobile phone if it's going over Wi-Fi, through your internet service provider, or through your computer, your laptop, or something like that, or your set-top box, whatever is set up to use the internet and to use Netflix. That those bits would get limited unless you paid this additional toll. And that's not the way the internet is supposed to be. That's not the way it was originally designed. It shouldn't be that the internet service providers can decide what we can see, how fast it can come. If I pay for a certain amount of bandwidth or a certain speed, that's what I should see, no matter who's sending me the data. So those are the 2 fundamental issues, and we've seen with the Federal Communications Commission under Obama that they kept those rules in place, and they actually put in rules to treat them just the way we do with the phone company or the phone.
Now, as far as that goes, when these laws were enforced, what kind of pushback did we see from these corporations?
Well, we saw pushback when corporations could get around net neutrality. They tried to. They would charge Netflix or other providers additional money, or they would throttle traffic, or they would say, we're only going to go at a certain rate. So as a result, instead of seeing it at glorious 1080p screen resolution, you'd only see it at, say, 640p or something like that. And they could go and instead limit that. If someone's paying for 100 megabits a second, then that's what they're paying for. And it shouldn't be that Netflix is charged an additional amount of money, or Netflix is charged an additional amount of money, or that they can say you cannot BitTorrent. You cannot use BitTorrent to download legitimate files. So, for example, Democracy Now! Puts all of their videos, all of their broadcasts on BitTorrent. Anyone can go and download them for free. It shouldn't be the case that in order to gain access to those, particular broadcasts, either I or Democracy Now! Has to pay additional money. But internet service providers would like to be able to charge us more and deliver us less, which is what they've been doing for the last, 20 years.
Okay. And so what exactly, when all of these got repealed for net neutrality, the big decision, what actions can people take themselves in order to help fight or win the fight against this whole system?
Well, Fight for the Future is organizing an effort to use the CRA, I believe it's a Congressional Review Act, to be able to roll back the FCC, the Trump-era Federal Communications Commission rule changes, and to say, no, net neutrality is going to be the law of the land here. They have 50 in the Senate. They're trying to get one more. So if your senator hasn't signed on, and you can, I believe you can find it out at battleforthenet.org or fightforthefuture.org.
And of course, this is all federal senators, correct? Not the local state.
They're all federal, not state senators. But that's the first step. If we can get that through the federal Senate, then that's easier to go and get it to the House, and additionally to put pressure on House members and senators if they go against net neutrality, which large, well over a majority, if not 80% or 90% of people support, if they go and challenge, if they go and don't support that, then they should know that they're going to be challengers and that they're going to lose their office. So that's one aspect to it. And that's something people can do now, is simply call your senators and reps and tell them to sign on to this. Yep.
And Jamie, so for the net neutrality and the reason, why is this such a pirate issue? Out of all the different issues, why is this one of our biggest ones?
Well, simply because, so the Pirate Party focuses on an open internet and being able to share the culture that we are all creating. That could be sharing files, that could be sharing music or videos, but it could also be just sharing ideas. And if net neutrality is eliminated, then that means internet service providers potentially can say what speech is allowed on their networks. What bits are allowed on their networks, and how much it's going to cost beyond just your normal monthly bill. And so by doing that, they're hindering speech, they're hindering people's ability to get ideas out there, to share ideas. And that's, free speech is a fundamental belief of the Pirate Party, that people should have the right to speak. That isn't necessarily to say that you have always the right to be listened to. We can choose, if we don't want to hear what Nazis are saying, then we shouldn't have to be forced to hear what Nazis are saying. But they still should have the right to say what they want to say. If we don't have people out, if internet service providers can decide certain people can't be heard from, then our democracy and our country is much poorer because of it.
And that kind of sounds like one of the main principles of the Pirate Party, which would be innovation. And we're looking to really help with innovation as well as really focus on copyright reform. Could you tell us a little bit more about those particular topics and why they're so important?
Sure. I mean, copyright reform gets into the whole aspect of being able to share our collective culture. You know, originally, when the country was founded, term of copyright was 14 years, and that could be renewed for another 14 years. That was sensible. Now it's instead life of the creator plus 70 years, or if it's a corporation, that's a little more limited. But the problem, but not that much more limited, I should say. But you know, corporations technically could never die, so it's certainly not life of the corporation. Though it might be good if we could remove some corporations, considering what they've done to our fellow citizens and our planet. But so we've gone from a maximum of 28 years that a work can be in copyright. And copyright means that someone who creates it, if someone writes a book, they get the right to the exclusive use of that book. They can decide, I want to go to a particular publisher, and that publisher is going to pay me a certain amount of money, and I'm going to give them permission to create that book. But once the term of copyright is over, then that book goes into the public domain. And if we've looked at it, you know, through various acts, Congress has extended that term of copyright such that there is this vast valley of movies, of books, of other creative works of art that are not available. And indeed, a bunch of years back, someone looked at what was available on Amazon just by randomly selecting book titles. And they found that you got into the 1920s when books were in public domain, and you could see those books were still being sold. And then you hit 1930s and they just dropped off dramatically, and then they'd start to rise again as you get into the present day. And so what was happening is this vast gulf of material that is of books, of videos, where it's under copyright. Someone or some organization has the copyright, but the point is it doesn't have commercial value. And because it doesn't have commercial value, or much in the way of commercial value, it isn't made available. It's not economic. It's not economical to be able to make it available. Whereas if something's in the public domain, suddenly there are a lot of people who want to make it available, even if it's, you know, certainly you can you know, books are, once they're in public domain, they can be available as ebooks for free, but still people are selling them because people want to be able to get printed copies of certain books. So what we're seeing is this vast gulf of our own past culture that is no longer available to us because it's not financially advantageous to whomever owns the copyright. So our terms of copyright are too long, which means things aren't in the public domain, which means we can't, not only can we not read them, but we can't take them and remix them and create new things. So from there, that issue is, again, it's, in a sense, it's a censorship issue. Certain works are available and other works aren't because there's no financial incentive.
Jamie, what would be a good example of, I think what you're really alluding to is copyright trolls, and what would be a good, like, modern example of a copyright troll? The only thing that I can really think that pops to mind is Disney, to be honest.
Well, I mean, so when we think of trolls, we usually think of patent trolls, and in that, another issue, and that's simply where someone has a patent, and usually they're overly broad. It could be used, you know, we joke that, you know, if you add do something that you do every day on the and then add on the internet to that, you can patent that. Now, the patent office has been lax, and we do see people who create these crappy patents, and then or they go and they buy patents from, you know, some company created a patent. They tried to create a product. It didn't succeed. They're like, okay, we're out of business. The only thing we have is this patent. We'll sell the patent off and make a bit of money. And these trolls amass all these patents, and then they go after if someone actually tries to innovate. We've seen it with podcasts where someone was claiming that they had the exclusive patent on a podcast, and unless you paid them money, you couldn't create a podcast or sell software for making podcasts. And that has the potential of stifling how people use things. So when we think of trolls, at least in this regard, usually we're talking about patent trolls. But at the same time, when we think of overbroad copyright, Mickey Mouse, as you said, and Disney is the poster child for that. And the reason why they extended the term of copyright to where it is now is simply because Disney didn't want to lose the copyright on early Mickey Mouse.
Honestly, Jamie, I could talk to you about copyrights all day and how they irk me, but I did want to move on to another point, which is another core principle of the Pirate Party is defending privacy, specifically the privacy of individual people. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. We believe privacy is a fundamental human right. And we've seen from the Snowden, we've seen from what we've gotten from the Snowden leaks, as well as other sources, that organizations like the National Security Agency are gathering up all of our much of our communications as possible. So we know that they gather things like who we're calling, when we're calling, how long we call for, where we're calling from, where they're receiving the call from, and that's metadata that gets gathered up, and that information is useful. It isn't just that the actual communications are useful, which of course is certainly an issue, but also the metadata, that data about how we're communicating, who we're communicating with, is vital. If you wanted to go and know who I am friends with, you can simply look at things like who's my friend network on different social media platforms, who I call regularly. And with that information, you can have a map of who I know. And once you know who I know, then you can have a better sense as someone who's, say, spying on me, of what leverage they could potentially use. And so we fundamentally believe that you have the right to privacy. And indeed, in our analog, non-digital world, we still have a lot of privacy. They can't go and they can't go and come and knock on your door. The FBI or the police cannot come in and knock on your door and say, hey, we want to put a camera in your bedroom. Like that isn't allowed. They can't do that. But at the same time, they can know, they can find out, the NSA certainly can find out who I'm communicating with and potentially even what I'm saying. And then they use then that information can be used in what's called parallel construction. So if they decided that for whatever reason they didn't like me, they felt I was a threat to the government of the United States, and or they thought potentially I might have done something illegal, then they can go and look through all of the FBI can contact the NSA, look through all of that data that the NSA has amassed on me and say, look, he was communicating with this person who we think is a terrorist, for example. Now they can use a form of what's called parallel construction. Now that they know what to look for and when to look for it, they can then go to my mobile phone carrier or my landline carrier or my internet service provider or Google and say, what has this person been searching on between, time A and time B? What were they searching on? Who were they calling? and they have all this information that I have no way that they've been able to gather, that they didn't go and say, you have me, Jamie O'Keefe, you've gone and we believe you've committed a crime. So now after the fact, we're going to go and gather all this information. They were able to sift through and find the crime they think I committed from all of the vast data the NSA has gathered, and then they're able to go and make their case by recreating that data. You know, I'm not, if I have a right in a court of law to be able to challenge what the data that they've gathered, but because the NSA is gathering everything, they can pick and choose and then, in a sense, launder that data to be able to make their case, and I don't have a way of challenging that. So fundamentally, we believe, the pirates believe, you have to have a sense, you have to have real privacy. There has to be a warrant to get data. The government shouldn't be mass collecting data on certainly American citizens, and ideally not everyone in the world. If they think someone is a terrorist, then they can go to the court and say, hey, we think this person is a terrorist, we think this person is going to commit a crime. We want to be able to get information. We want to be able to gather information on them. And a judge can say, yeah, this looks like a fishing expedition. I'm not going to give you, you have no justification for why you think this person is a terrorist, except you have an informant who may or may not be the most reliable because, you know, they're on your payroll.
I definitely like the idea of due process and having due process. So having the warrants, I'm a strong supporter myself of definitely going back to the warrant ways and not having all this, oh, I just have a feeling, let's bug this person. I think that's a really serious, a lot of rights that we lost, especially with everything that was put into place to begin with. And I think we really need to touch upon this. Though we are starting to run a little low on time, so I'm going to keep us moving forward. So
Well,
on the reverse side of that,
one thing I just want to bring up, if I can.
Mhm.
So,
of course,
when the NSA is gathering all this information, they're doing what we fought a revolution to stop. Now, one of the reasons that we fought the American Revolution was because the government would go and say, they would write what's called a general warrant. We have the right to go into your house and just search for anything. Now, a warrant, the way a warrant is, they have to say what they're looking for and where they're looking for it. So it's very, you know, time and place and material specific. I'm looking for, you know, financial records in relation to X that are in the house of James O'Keefe. Not, oh, well, we get to search your house and rifle through everything in your house in order to be able to find something. You know, in the days before we legalized cannabis, it could be, oh, well, even though we didn't say we were looking for proof that you use cannabis or not, but we found cannabis here, and so we're going to charge you for that crime, even though that's not what we were looking for. So we fought a revolution to stop these general warrants, and yet over 200 years later, we are imposing those exact type of search methods and illegal methods and ways that are just counter to fundamental human rights. We are imposing them. And so it's as if we don't know our own history. And we are more concerned about stopping terrorist acts, which are very rare anyways. Far more people die from cars or drowning in the bathtub than die from terrorist attacks. So, you know, we're increasingly seeing greater government surveillance, but it's not really based on any real sense of what the risks that are involved.
Okay. Thank you for that, Jamie. So on the reverse side, one of the other biggest topics I hear all the time is that we really, really push for that open government. And so can we touch upon like the open government and why we want to really put people first?
Sure. That's an easy one. Look, if you look at Massachusetts government,
Mm-hmm.
your ability to go and find out how the government is doing the job it's doing is very limited. So, for example, I put in a Freedom of Information Act request back in, I believe it was 2016, with my local police department saying, hey, where are all your surveillance cameras? What are you doing with that film? And a variety of questions. And I did it through a great site called muckrock.org. Now, Muckrock is very dutiful. Every 11 days, they send them another email saying, hey, we put in this Freedom of Information Act request, this FOIA request, and we still haven't heard back. And Somerville keeps deferring it and keeps not responding. We have some of the most lax Freedom of Information Act laws in the country. We get basically a D rating in terms of what information is available to people and how quickly we can get that information. If we don't know what our government is doing, if we can't find this information out, then how do we even know that it's doing the correct things? So fundamentally, we believe that our government needs to be open. Unless there's a privacy reason, unless there's some valid justification, all information that the state of Massachusetts and the municipalities, the cities and towns of Massachusetts create should just be available online. There's no reason anyone should have to pay for it. It's created with our tax dollars. We should be able to get those documents, that data, without even having to ask for it. We should be able to just go search. I want this set of data. Oh, here it is for my particular town. Unless there's, sorry.
So just in my layman's terms, so essentially we should all have access to these cameras. If they're cameras that are, unless it's under a specific investigation to help close a case, I feel that certain cameras, or if they're going to be government regulated things, we should all be able to look through these cameras, right?
Well, I'm wary about that, because that gets to, are we going to crowdsource Big Brother here? Are we going to set it up so that people can go and look at these surveillance cameras and, oh, this person is doing something that I think is illegal. Let me go and have the police go. Let me call the police and tell them this is happening. You know, I mean, maybe they're just doing something that you don't like. I mean, I'm not convinced that having anyone have access to all the surveillance footage is necessarily the right answer. But at the same time, I should know where the cameras are. I should be able to know what their data retention policy is. And that information needs to be available. So that's what we're advocating.
And what about police cams or body cams? What's your feeling on those?
So we do support body cameras, police body cameras. That information has to be available to, it shouldn't be limited to just prosecutors and the police. If someone is accused of a crime and and there's police body cam footage, then they should be able to see that information. Whether that information is then available for everyone, you know, we'll have to see. There have been some particularly awful cases where, for example, in Baltimore, there was a guy who, there was a police officer who didn't realize that the body camera footage was basically always recording, but would only actively save once you press the button. At least that's what he thought. But indeed, what it would do is it would start saving the first 30 seconds before. So it would always have kind of a 30-second, excuse me, a 30-second set of recordings. And he just so happened to say that he found, you know, had a recording of him finding drugs in the back of this property. The funny thing is, the 30 seconds before, he was placing the drugs in the back of the property. So, you know, if that information has to be available, certainly to the defendant and potentially to other people as well. if they had interactions with the cops.
Hmm.
So,
Well, I mean, all police reports are a matter of public record. Why not the information, unless it's unless it's an ongoing investigation? And there's a lot of gray areas there, obviously, but um, I agree with you that that information should be public knowledge. Um, so, and then how do we put people first, sir?
so putting people first is, we want people to have power and corporations not to. We've since the 90s, indeed since perhaps the early 80s, we've seen corporations having more and more rights than people do. Corporations are limited liability corporation, or that's one form, but basically it indemnifies the stockholders that if the corporation does something bad, they're going to do is lose their money. They're not going to go to jail because of it. But we've seen corporations that are dumping, that are polluting our groundwater in the case of fracking, or are aiding and abetting the NSA, and indeed making a profit by selling their data to the NSA and to many other corporations out there in terms of the data that they've gathered on us. um, but yet there's no liability if they do something wrong with it, or there's no liability to the individual's stockholders. So corporations can get away with vast crimes in a sense. You look at what happened in the 2008 financial crisis, and these corporations basically essentially went and doctored the books in order to give people loans that they may not have qualified for, just so that they could then come back 6 months, a year later, and jack up the interest rates. I mean, it's predatory financing at its, I wouldn't say finest, but at its most toxic. And it did a good portion of taking down our economy. We're still recovering from it. And yet these corporations got bailed out to the tune of about $17 trillion. They got $17 trillion lent to them from the Federal Reserve, such that they got all this free money in essence, and were able to rebuild their balance sheets. When people got laid off as a result of the 2008 financial crisis, they didn't get any bailout. The rich got a bailout, and through their corporations. We're seeing that. We'll see that with the Trump tax cut. That money will go to basically reduce the corporate tax, reduce what little taxation there is in corporations, and allow more money to be transferred to stockholders. So stockholders are going to benefit. You and I, the average person, because the 1% owns most of the stock in this country, we're not going to benefit from this. So we want to make sure that people have quality health insurance, affordable health insurance, ideally single payer health insurance, because that's the only thing that's worked if you look throughout the rest of the world. We're seeing rises in suicides, rises in opiate use, and we're actually taking steps back when it comes to our own life expectancy. The life expectancy of people in the United States has actually declined in the last year. That's a first. Industrialized countries, advanced economies like ours shouldn't have. We should be continuing to go up in terms of life expectancy. We shouldn't be declining. And so we have a fundamental disconnect in terms of where money goes. It's increasingly going towards to a small number of people. And as a result, we want to make sure that people have the resources they need to succeed in this world, in terms of their health, in terms of their wellness, in terms of a quality education, a quality job. If we don't do that, then we're increasingly going to become a second-rate or even a third-rate country. So we want to go and change the trajectory that we're on to make sure that people are put forward, not corporations and the rich.
All right. Thank you for that, Jamie. I really appreciate it. We are right at time, so I'm going to hit you with one more question. It's a real hot topic for myself personally,
All right, I'll
but
keep it short.
how would you feel about really pushing, or the Pirate Party pushing for more of a democracy versus a republic? And that being that we're already in a Commonwealth right now, which has even stranger rules than most of the states in this union.
Well, fundamentally, we look at just Massachusetts politics. 80% of the Massachusetts legislature, are Democrats. All of the federal representatives and senators are Democrats. I mean, in essence, we are a one-party state. We switch the governor out occasionally between the parties, but the legislature and our representatives to Congress, they don't change. So, and part of that is simply because, on average, at best, at best, at best, we have 1/3 to 40% of all districts in Massachusetts actually have competitors. So we need to fundamentally change the way we are electing people in order to give voters more choices. When 60% of our legislature has only one person running for office in that district, we aren't really a democracy. There's no choice involved there. Moving towards some form of proportional representation, instant runoff voting, and looking at other means of increasing the diversity of who we actually elect is an important first step. Additionally, we need to look at other ways of making decisions to try and devolve more choices down to a local level, coming up with county-based governments, or even going as much as we can towards a direct democracy.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much for that, Jamie. Thank you for bearing with me and answering all these questions. I think that we're at a really good cutting off point, and I would be looking forward to doing this again next week if you're down for it.
Well, next week, the Patriots are going to be in the Super Bowl, so we'll see.
Oh, yes, that's right. And we're Massachusetts, so we have to watch Patriots. So go Pats. We love you guys. Go Brady, go everyone. But it's not just Brady, it's all of you on the team. So much love from us for y'all.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.